Have you ever saved someone's life only to have them pretend they didn't know who you were? 10 days ago, I pulled a man from beneath a rockslide in Saddleback Canyon. His blood soaked into the red Arizona dirt while I worked to free him, my hands raw and bleeding by the time I dragged him clear. Today, that same man stood before the iron gates of his ranch and looked at me as though we'd never met. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. The train pulled into Tucson Station at 6 o'clock on the evening of June 14, 1883. The sun hung low over the Catalina Mountains, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. I stepped onto the weathered platform with everything I owned packed into a single canvas bag. My name is Kayla. It means crown of laurels in the language of my mother's people, the Apache. My grandmother gave me that name when I was born small and fragile, not expected to survive my first winter. She said I would need a strong name to carry me through the hard times ahead. She was right about the hard times. The station master, a wiry man named Clyde with tobacco-stained fingers and suspicious eyes, looked up from his ledger when I approached. His gaze traveled from my worn calico dress to my sun-darkened skin, lingering on the beaded medicine bag hanging at my waist. "Help you, miss," his tone suggested he doubted it. I pulled the letter from my bag. The paper had grown soft from handling during the long journey from Fort Apache. I'd read it so many times I could recite every word. "I'm here to meet Mr. Thornton. He was supposed to be waiting." Clyde squinted at the letter, then at me, then back at the letter. Something shifted in his face. "You're the bride." He didn't bother hiding his disbelief. "For Mr. James Thornton of Silver Star Ranch?" "That's what the letter says." He scratched his jaw. "Well now, Mr. Thornton is the wealthiest rancher in 3 territories, owns more land than some eastern states, and he went and picked—" He didn't finish. I'd heard variations of it my entire life. "Is he here or not?" Clyde shook his head. "Haven't seen hide nor hair of him. Not today, not yesterday neither." The train whistle echoed across the valley, growing fainter. I watched it disappear into the gathering dusk, that thin line of smoke, the only proof it had ever been there at all. How far to the ranch? 10 miles west through Saddleback Canyon. "But miss, it'll be full dark in 2 hours, and that road ain't safe after sundown." I'd spent the last 6 months sleeping in a storage room behind a Chinese laundry in Tucson, curled up on flour sacks with my coat for a blanket. Before that, I'd survived on the reservation, where the government agent rationed food like gold and medicine like it was sacred. I'd watched my mother waste away from consumption because the fort doctor said treating Indians was a waste of his time. Waiting had never done me any good. "Is there a shortcut?" Clyde's eyebrows climbed. He studied me for a long moment. "There's a path through the canyon. Cuts about 3 miles off. Follow the creek bed north till you see a split rock that looks like a broken tooth. Bear left there." He paused. "But I really wouldn't recommend it. Not alone. Not this late." "I appreciate the warning." I picked up my bag and stepped off the platform onto the hard-packed dirt. The smell hit me immediately. Sage and creosote, bush dry grass, and sun-baked earth. Nothing like the soot and river stench of the cities back east. This was clean sharp alive. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. I touched the small brass watch in my pocket. It had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, and finally to me. The only thing of value I owned. My mother had wound that watch every night before bed right up until her hands grew too weak to turn the stem. "Keep moving forward, Kayla girl," she used to say. "The spirits help those who help themselves." I squared my shoulders and started walking. The canyon swallowed sound the way a well swallows stones. I'd been walking for nearly an hour. The walls of Saddleback had risen on either side steep enough to trap the heat of the dying day. Sweat plastered my dress to my back. The bag grew heavier with each step. I hadn't passed another soul. No wagons, no riders, nothing but scrub brush and red rock and the distant chatter of the creek. The silence pressed against my ears like cotton wool. What kind of man doesn't come to meet his bride? I'd asked myself that question 100 times since stepping off the train. The letter had been so careful, so precise. "Dear Miss Kayla," it began, "I am a man of few words and fewer graces, but I am honest and I will be good to you. The West is hard country, but there is beauty here if you know where to look. I have land, a sturdy house, and need of a companion. If you are willing to take a chance on a stranger, I will meet you at Tucson Station on June 14th. Respectfully yours, J. Thornton." 47 words. I had staked my entire future on 47 words. "Foolish girl," whispered a voice in my head that sounded like my mother during the fever times. What did you expect? I stopped walking and pressed my palm against the canyon wall. The rock was warm, rough against my skin. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. "I'm not foolish," I told the voice. "I'm brave. There's a difference." I opened my eyes and kept walking. The horse appeared around the bend like a ghost. I froze. The animal stood in the middle of the path, a tall chestnut with a white blaze on its forehead, reins trailing in the dust. It watched me with large, liquid eyes. Dried foam crusted its neck. Wherever it had come from, it had been running hard. "Easy now," I murmured, stepping closer. "Easy." The horse snorted, but didn't bolt. That's when I saw the blood. Dark stains on the saddle, smeared along the horse's right side. Too much to be from a scratch. My stomach dropped. I followed the trail with my eyes. The scuff marks in the dust, the displaced stones. They led around boulders toward a section where fresh rockfall had spilled across the path. "Walk away," said the sensible voice in my head. "Get on the horse. Ride to town. Find help." But my grandmother's voice said something different. "When you see someone in need, Kayla girl, you don't walk past. That's not who we are." My feet were already moving. The rocks were the color of dried blood in the fading light. Some small as fists, others large as barrels. They'd come down recently. I could see the fresh scar on the wall above. I climbed over the first boulder, then the second, and stopped. A hand jutted out from beneath a slab of granite. Fingers curled toward the sky, motionless. A man's hand, broad palm calloused fingers, a simple silver ring on the third finger. I dropped my bag. I scrambled over the remaining rocks. The man lay on his side, half buried. His face was turned away, but I could see the rise and fall of his chest, shallow, labored, but there, alive. "Mister." I knelt beside him. "Mister, can you hear me?" No response. Dark hair matted with blood and dust, a deep gash across his forehead, still seeping. His left leg was pinned under a rock too heavy for me to move alone. I looked at the fading sky, looked at the unconscious stranger. The sensible choice was still to ride for help, but the blood was still flowing, and the sun was nearly gone, and I remembered what my grandmother had taught me about head wounds, how the cold crept in fast once the body started giving up. I closed my eyes for just a moment. "Spirits," I prayed silently. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but I can't leave him here to die. Please give me strength." I opened my eyes and rolled up my sleeves. The smaller rocks came away first. My fingernails split against the granite. I didn't stop. Each stone I pulled free revealed more: his shoulder, the curve of his back, the torn fabric of what had once been a good wool shirt. His breathing changed, hitched. A low groan escaped his lips. "Hold on." I wiped my palms on my skirt. "I'm getting you out." The slab pinning his leg was the problem, flat and heavy, wedged at an angle. I braced my shoulder against it and pushed. My boots scraped against loose gravel. The rock shifted barely, an inch, maybe two. Not enough. I repositioned myself, dug my heels in, and pushed again. Harder, until my arms shook and spots danced at the edges of my vision. The slab scraped sideways. His leg came free. I collapsed against the boulder, chest heaving. My hands were raw, bleeding in places. The man's eyes opened, gray. Pale gray like winter sky before snow. They fixed on my face, unfocused, struggling to make sense. His lips moved. No sound came out. I reached for the canteen on the horse's saddle. battered leather worn smooth with use. I unscrewed the cap, lifted his head, and tipped a small amount against his mouth. He swallowed, coughed, swallowed again. "Water," he rasped. "I know. Easy now, not too fast." His eyes drifted shut, opened again, fixed on me with something approaching clarity. "Who?" Another cough. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter right now." I examined his leg in the dying light, swollen, already purpling at the ankle. But the bone hadn't broken through the skin. The gash on his forehead was worse, deep enough to show white beneath the red. It needed cleaning, stitching. Things I couldn't do here in the failing dark. "There's a cabin." His voice was barely a whisper. "Half-mile. Follow the creek." Then his eyes rolled back and he went limp. I looked at the horse, looked at the unconscious stranger, looked at the last sliver of sun vanishing behind the canyon rim, half a mile in the dark, with a man twice my weight who might not live till morning. Getting him onto the horse nearly broke me. I hooked my arms under his shoulders and pulled. His boots dragged furrows in the dirt. Every muscle in my back screamed. My knees buckled twice before I managed to prop him against a boulder. The horse stood patient. Its breath came warm against my cheek. "Come on now," I grabbed his belt with one hand, his shirt collar with the other. "You've got to help me, just a little." Something flickered across his face. His good leg moved, found the stirrup. I shoved from below, teeth gritted, and somehow he ended up draped across the saddle. I took the reins and started walking. One step, then another. The creek bed stretched ahead, pale stones glowing faintly. "Half a mile," he'd said. "Please," I prayed silently. "Please let me find this cabin." The cabin appeared between one blink and the next. A dark shape hunched against the hillside. The creek gurgled past its western wall. No smoke from the chimney, no light in the windows. Abandoned. I pushed open the door. The hinges shrieked. The smell hit me first. Old wood mouse droppings, something musty and closed in. Beneath that, the faint char of a long-dead fire. I fumbled along the mantel, found a candle stub, matches beside it. The match head scraped and flared. The flame sputtered to life, throwing shadows across the single room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A wooden cot with a straw mattress. A table, 2 chairs. An iron pot hanging from a hook over the cold hearth. It smelled like a place that had been forgotten. But it had walls. It had a roof. It would have to do. The man's forehead burned against my palm. I dragged him inside and laid him on the cot. His skin was the color of old candle wax, except for 2 spots of fever red high on his cheeks. The gash had stopped bleeding, but the edges were ragged, angry, already starting to swell. I needed water, fire, light to work by. The creek was 20 steps from the door. I found the copper pot and filled it. The water ran cold and clear, numbing my fingers. I carried it back and set it by the hearth. Kindling first. Dry sticks stacked beside the fireplace. I crumpled leaves for tinder. The match caught on the second try and flame crawled up through the kindling. Heat crept into the cabin. Light flickered across the walls. I tore strips from my petticoat. The cotton was worn thin, but clean. I dipped a strip in the warming water, wrung it out, and pressed it against the wound. The man flinched. His eyes flew open, wild, unseeing. "Easy now." I held his shoulders down. "You're safe. Lie still." He fought me for a moment. Then it drained out of him, and he sank back, chest heaving. I cleaned the gash with careful strokes. The water turned pink, then red. I dumped it outside, refilled it, started again. The wound was deep but clean. No dirt embedded. No rock fragments. His leg worried me more. The ankle had swollen to twice its normal size. Purple bruising spread toward his knee. I ran my fingers along the bone, pressing gently. He groaned, but didn't wake. No grinding. No unnatural angles. Sprained. Badly sprained, maybe torn, but not broken. I needed something to draw out the fever, something for the swelling. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "Yerba mansa for wounds, Kyla girl. Willow bark for fever. Look for them by running water. I took the candle and went back outside. The creek bank yielded what I needed. Yerba mansa grew in thick clumps near the water's edge, its leaves soft and silvery in the candlelight. I gathered handfuls, stuffed them into my pockets. Found willow, too, its branches trailing in the current. Back inside, I searched until I found a wooden bowl. A smooth river stone served as a pestle. I crushed the yerba mansa leaves until they released their sharp, bitter smell. The smell of my grandmother's medicine lodge. The smell of childhood, of being safe and cared for. The man hadn't moved. His breathing came fast and shallow sweat beading on his upper lip. I packed the poultice against his forehead and bound it with strips of petticoat. Then I turned to his leg, wrapped the crushed herbs around the ankle, tied it firm but not too tight. I heated more water, poured some into a tin cup, added willow bark, let it steep until the water turned pale gold. Here. I lifted his head and held the cup to his lips. Drink this. It'll help with the fever. He swallowed without opening his eyes. Once, twice. The warm liquid ran down his chin, but some went down his throat. I eased him back onto the pillow. Then I sat down on the floor beside the cot and waited. The fever peaked somewhere in the deep hours of the night. I lost track of time. There was only the rhythm: check his forehead, wring out the cloth, press it against his burning skin. Again. Again. His body shook with chills even as heat radiated off him. He muttered words I couldn't understand. Names, maybe. Once he grabbed my wrist with startling strength, his eyes open but seeing something far away. "I'm here," I said. "I'm here." His grip loosened. His eyes closed. I changed the poultice twice, fed the fire when it burned low. The darkness outside shifted from black to gray to pale pink, and slowly his breathing steadied. His skin cooled beneath my palm. The trembling stopped. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. My shoulders ached, my eyes burned, but the worst had passed. He woke with the first true light of morning. I'd been dozing against the cot. The sound of his voice jerked me upright. "Where—" he coughed. "Where am I safe?" I reached for the water pot. "A cabin by the creek. You told me about it before you passed out." He took the cup with shaking hands and drank. His gray eyes moved around the room, taking in the fire, the bandages, the strips of torn petticoat drying on the hearthstones. "You did all this?" I didn't answer. The question didn't need one. He studied my face for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. "Who are you?" "Someone who was walking through that canyon." I took the empty cup. "Your turn." "Who are you?" The pause lasted a beat too long. "Eli," he said finally. "Name's Eli." I watched his eyes when he said it, watched the way they slid sideways just for a heartbeat before meeting mine again. My grandmother had always said I had a gift for reading faces, for knowing when someone was telling the truth and when they were selling snake oil. This man, this Eli, was hiding something. I didn't know what. Didn't know why a wounded stranger would have reason to lie about his name, but I knew one thing for certain. He wasn't telling me the whole truth. Still, he was hurt and weak, and I'd just spent the entire night keeping him alive. Whatever secrets he carried could wait. The cornbread had gone stale 3 days ago. I unwrapped it from the cotton cloth. The edges crumbled under my fingers, dry and yellow-brown. I'd been rationing the squares since Fort Apache, one small piece each morning. Now only 2 remained, and my stomach had been hollow since yesterday. I thought of my mother standing at the old stove, mixing cornmeal and buttermilk in the chipped blue bowl. The smell of it baking had filled our tiny rooms every Sunday afternoon. "Always share what you have, Kayla girl," she used to say. "The spirits see what we do when no one's watching." I broke the larger piece in half, then in half again. Weighed the portions in my palms. The man on the cot, Eli, if that was really his name, watched me with those gray eyes. He'd been awake for an hour now, propped against the wall, his bandaged legs stretched out. I crossed the cabin and placed the larger portion in his hand. He looked down at it, looked back up at me. The cornbread sat in his palm like something precious. Eat. You need the strength more than I do. What about you? I've got mine. I returned to my spot by the fire and settled onto the floor with my back against the warm hearthstone. The cornbread was dry in my mouth, crumbly. The sweetness had faded to almost nothing. I chewed slowly, making it last. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the distant murmur of the creek. A mockingbird called outside its song bright through the gaps in the cabin walls. Eli ate slowly, methodically. When he finished, he brushed the crumbs from his fingers and fixed his eyes on her face. "You were walking through that canyon alone." Not a question. I nodded. "Where were you headed?" I reached into my bag and pulled out 3 dried apples. 6 left. I counted them twice, then divided them. 3 and 3. Eventually, I said. I was supposed to be met at Tucson Station. I crossed to the cot and dropped 3 apples into his palm. No one came. Eli turned the apples over in his hand. His jaw tightened slightly. Met by who? A man named Thornton. I returned to the fire and bit into an apple. The sweetness was faint, but still there. He sent for me, sent for you. How mail-order bride. I kept my eyes on the flames. I answered an advertisement. He wrote back. 3 letters, then a train ticket. The apple turned dry in my mouth. She forced herself to swallow, and he didn't come. The fire popped. Sparks spiraled up toward the chimney. The station master said, "This Thornton owns the biggest ranch in these parts. Star Ranch, he called it." I looked at Eli. "You know it." Something changed in his face, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness that hadn't been there before. "I've heard of it." "Then you know more than I do." I bit into another apple. "All I know is 47 words in a letter." Turns out that wasn't much to stake a life on. The afternoon sun slanted through the cabin's single window. I had changed his bandages twice. The wound on his forehead was closing well, no redness spreading outward, no smell of sickness. His ankle remained swollen, but the bruising had shifted from deep purple to yellow-green at the edges. I worked in silence, my hands moving through the familiar motions. Crush the herbs, mix the poultice, clean the wound, wrap it fresh. Eli watched. It should have made me uneasy, those gray eyes following my every movement, but something in his watching felt different. "Where did you learn all that?" His voice broke the silence. "Learn what?" "The herbs, the bandages." He gestured at his wrapped ankle. "You knew exactly what to do." I poured water into the pot and set it over the fire. "My mother taught me. She couldn't afford doctors, so she learned to make do without." "She taught you well." "She taught me everything she could." I stirred the water. "She passed when I was 17. Consumption. 3 months of coughing and fever, and then one morning she just stopped." The words came out before I could catch them. I hadn't meant to say so much. Hadn't talked about my mother to anyone since leaving Fort Apache. Eli was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. "Your father," he asked finally. "Never knew him, never knew his name." I pulled the pot from the fire. "Mama worked in a textile mill. That's all she ever told me about him. I brought him the water." Our fingers brushed when he took the cup. "So you came west," he said, "all alone." Was there another way? The question sat between them, heavy with everything it didn't say. "Most folks wouldn't have stopped in that canyon," Eli said. "A woman alone, strange man bleeding in the dirt. Most folks would have ridden for town. I reckon most folks have better sense than me. I'm serious." He shifted on the cot, wincing as his ankle moved. "You could have left me there." "No one would have known." "I would have known. That's not—" He stopped, swallowed. "What I mean is why? Why did you stay?" I thought about the question, really thought. "Because you were hurt," I said finally. "And I was there. It's not more complicated than that." Eli tried to stand near sunset. I saw him moving from the corner of my eye, hands braced against the wall, good leg taking his weight. I was across the cabin before he'd straightened fully, my hand on his arm. "What in the world do you think you're doing? Testing it?" His face had gone pale with effort. Sweat beaded at his temples. "Can't stay flat on my back forever. You can stay off your feet for more than one day." He ignored me, shifted his weight to the injured leg just slightly. His breath caught. The muscles in his jaw went tight as wire, but he didn't fall. "See?" The word came out thin, strained. "I'm all right." I kept my hand on his arm. Through the worn fabric, I could feel the tremor running through him, the effort it took just to stay upright. "You're stubborn as a mule. That's not the same as all right." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough. Fair point. I helped him lower himself back onto the cot. He moved carefully, deliberately. When he was settled, he closed his eyes, his breathing slowly steadied. "Thank you," he said without looking at me, "for everything. The bandages, the food." A pause. "For not leaving me in that canyon to die." I gathered the empty cup, the used bandages, the mortar with its residue of crushed herbs. Small tasks to keep my hands busy. You'd have done the same. Eli opened his eyes, looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Would I? The question startled me. I turned cup in hand. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know anything about you." The fire crackled. Outside, the light was fading, painting the window amber and gold. "You're right," Eli said quietly. "You don't." I waited for more. An explanation, a confession, something. But he only turned his face toward the wall and closed his eyes. 3 days in the cabin, and Eli could walk. Not well, not far, but he could hobble from the cot to the door without my arm beneath his shoulder. "I can help," he said, standing at the threshold. "With the water, the firewood." Something. "You can rest. I've rested plenty." He turned. "Please, let me be useful." I set down the mortar. "Fine. You can fill the water pot. But if you tumble into that creek, I'm not fishing you out." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. He didn't fall. I watched from the doorway as he made his way down the bank. His bad leg dragged slightly, and twice he stopped to steady himself against a cottonwood trunk. But he reached the creek, filled the bucket, carried it back. By the time he reached the cabin, his face was gray with effort. Sweat darkened his collar, but his eyes held something that hadn't been there before. Something fierce and hard won. I took the bucket. "Sit down before you fall down." He sat. "You're good at this," Eli said from the cot. "At what? Getting by." He was watching me again, making do with next to nothing. Most folks would have given up by now. I stirred the pot. Crying doesn't put food on the table. My mama taught me that. She sounds like a wise woman. She was practical. She knew we couldn't afford to fall apart. The fire crackled. Steam began to rise from the water. "You don't talk much about yourself," I said. The words came out before I could stop them. I kept my eyes on the pot. Nothing worth telling. Everybody's got a story. Some stories are better left alone. I lifted my head, met his gaze across the small cabin. The distance couldn't have been more than 10 feet. But it felt like a canyon. You know mine. The mill, my mother, the letters, the train. I set down the stirring stick. "I've told you just about everything there is to tell." Eli's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the window. "I grew up on a ranch," he said finally. "Worked cattle since I was old enough to sit a saddle. It's all I know." That's not a story. That's a sentence. His eyes came back to mine. Something moved in their depths. Irritation, maybe, or something deeper, something that looked almost like guilt. "What do you want from me, Kayla?" The question hung in the dusty air. "Nothing," I said at last. "I don't want anything from you." I turned back to the fire, lifted the pot, poured the warm water into a clean cloth. I could feel his eyes on my back as I crossed to the cot, knelt beside him, began unwrapping the bandage on his ankle. "What did you want from him?" Eli's voice was quiet. "The man who sent for you. This Thornton fellow." My hand stilled on the bandage. "A roof over my head. 4 walls. A place where I belonged. That's all. What else would there be?" I peeled away the last layer of cloth. The swelling had gone down considerably. The bruising was fading to yellow at the edges. Another few days and he'd be walking proper. Another few days, and he'd leave. Most women want more than that, Eli said. Most women have choices. I pressed the warm cloth against his ankle. He flinched, but didn't pull away. I had a boarding house room I couldn't pay for, and a job at a laundry that barely kept me fed. When you're drowning, you don't ask whether the rope's made of silk or hemp. You grab hold and hang on. I tied off the bandage and sat back on my heels. Eli was watching me with that strange look again, like I was something he couldn't quite figure out. And if the man who threw you that rope turned out to be different than you expected, I stood and gathered the soiled bandages. Then I deal with that when it happens. Night fell slow over the canyon. The light didn't fade so much as thicken. I fed the fire-checked Eli's bandages one last time, then settled into my spot on the floor near the hearth. The blanket was thin and moth-eaten, but it was better than nothing. I curled onto my side and closed my eyes. Sleep came in pieces, scraps of dreams, my mother's face, the rattle of train wheels, red dust rising in clouds. I drifted up and down, aware of the fire's crackle, the creek's endless murmur, the soft rhythm of Eli's breathing from the cot. Then, in the deep middle of the night, I woke. Something had changed. The quality of the silence, maybe. Crickets sang outside. An owl called somewhere up the canyon. The cabin walls creaked. I lay still, my eyes adjusting. Moonlight streamed through the cracks, painting pale stripes across the floor. And in that light I could see Eli. He was sitting up on the cot, his back against the wall, his eyes open and fixed on something I couldn't see. His hands were clasped in his lap, knuckles white. His lips moved. I couldn't hear the words, barely a whisper, but I caught fragments. Should have told her. Can't, she doesn't know. His head turned toward me. I held my breath, kept my eyes nearly closed, prayed the moonlight wasn't bright enough to give me away. Eli looked at me for a long moment. The fire had burned down to embers, casting his face in shadow and faint red glow. Then he turned away, faced the wall. His shoulders rose and fell with a breath that might have been a sigh, or might have been something closer to surrender. I waited until his breathing changed, until I was sure he'd drifted into sleep. Then I opened my eyes fully and turned the question over in my mind. She doesn't know. Know what? What was this man hiding? And when the truth finally came out, as truth always did, which side of it would I find myself standing on? 5 days and the cabin had started to feel like something close to home. I knew where the floorboards creaked. I knew which corner of the fireplace drew the best draft. I knew how the morning light fell through the window in a golden slant that reached the cot by mid-morning. I knew the sound of Eli's breathing when he slept and the different sound when he was awake, but pretending not to be. Small things, the kind that accumulated without asking permission. I was sorting herbs at the table when Eli pushed himself up from the cot and actually walked without the wall to lean onto the cabin door. I need some air. Not asking, stating. I set down the yerba mansa stems. Your ankle's fine. He pushed the door open. Sunlight flooded in. Better than fine. I need to move around some. I watched him step outside. His gait was still uneven, favoring the bad leg, but the limp had faded to barely a hitch. A week ago, I'd worried he might never walk right again. I wiped my hands on my apron, gathered the herbs into a cloth bundle, and followed him out. The creek caught the midday sun and scattered it into 1,000 bright pieces. Eli stood at the water's edge, his face tilted up toward the sky. His eyes were closed, and for a moment he looked almost peaceful. Then he heard my footsteps and turned, and whatever I'd seen slipped away behind his usual careful expression. "Show me," he said. "Show you what the plants." He gestured toward the creek bank. "The ones you've been using on me, I'd like to learn." I studied his face, looking for mockery. Found none. Just that strange intensity. "Why?" "Because you saved my life with them." He met my eyes. Seems like something worth knowing. I considered saying no, considered retreating to the cabin. But his eyes held genuine curiosity, and I'd spent too many years being overlooked to turn away someone who actually wanted to listen. "All right, but pay attention. I don't intend to repeat myself. I taught him the way my mother had taught me. Hands in the dirt. Names and uses braided together. Yerba mansa. I pulled a stem, held it up. Good for wounds and infections. You crush it into a paste with a little water. The smell tells you when it's ready. Bitter like medicine ought to be. Eli took the stem from my hand. Our fingers brushed. He turned the plant over, studying it. How do you know it's yerba mansa and not something that'll make things worse? The leaves. I knelt beside another clump. See how they're shaped almost like hearts, and that silver-green color underneath. Nothing else around here looks quite like it. He knelt beside me. His shoulder was close to mine. I stood up quick, moved to the next plant. Willow, the white bark there. Good for fever, for bringing down swelling. You can steep it in hot water for tea or use the bark directly. Eli followed slower, his ankle protesting the uneven ground, but he didn't complain. He watched and listened and asked questions that showed he was truly hearing what I said. What about that one? He pointed to a low-growing plant near the water's edge. Dock. I crouched down. Good for rashes, insect bites. The root's the useful part. But you've got to be careful. There's another plant that looks similar, grows further from water. That one will make you plenty sick. How do you tell them apart? Practice. I let the leaves fall back. My mama made me learn every plant in the woods behind our place, tested me till I could name them with my eyes closed. Eli was quiet for a spell. When he spoke again, his voice had gone soft. She sounds like a good woman. Your mother. My throat tightened. I turned away, pretended to study a cluster of chamomile. She was practical. That's what kept us alive. They worked their way along the creek bank, me pointing out plants. Eli listening and learning. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened. The air grew cooler. I lost track of time. There was something about teaching that opened me up, my hands moving to show what my mouth described. And Eli listened, really listened, not the way men usually did, half their attention somewhere else. He took in every word, asked questions that proved he understood. The thought caught me off guard. I stumbled on a root, and Eli's hand shot out to catch my elbow. Careful there. I pulled away too quick. I saw something cross his face before he covered it over. Thank you kindly. The words came out stiff. I'm fine. They stood there, the creek singing between them, the afternoon light turning everything to gold. Kyla. Her name in his mouth did something strange to my chest. I waited. When I'm healed up, he said, when I can walk proper again. He paused, swallowed. I'll have to go. I'd known it was coming, had been bracing myself for it, but hearing him say it out loud made something twist beneath my ribs. I know. I kept my voice flat. You've got your own life to get back to. Yes. The word dropped between them like a stone into still water. I turned toward the cabin, took one step, two. What about you? Eli's voice stopped me. Where will you go? I didn't turn around. Crestwood, I reckon. Find work there. A laundry, maybe, or a boarding house. There's always work for women who aren't afraid of hard labor. By yourself. That's how I got here. That's how I'll leave. Silence. The creek rushed on. It doesn't have to be that way. Eli's voice was barely louder than the water. Alone, I mean. My breath caught. I turned slowly, found him watching me with something raw and unguarded written plain across his face. What are you saying? He opened his mouth, closed it again. The openness vanished so fast I almost thought I'd imagined it. Nothing. He looked away toward the cabin. Never mind. Forget I said anything. But I couldn't forget. Couldn't unknow the way he'd looked at me in that unguarded moment. I walked back to the cabin without another word. At the door I paused, turned. Eli. He looked up from where he'd stopped by the woodpile. That man who sent for me, Thornton. My voice held steady. The station master said he's the wealthiest man in the territory. Eli's face went still as pond water. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked what I wanted from him. I met his eyes. I told you a roof wall's somewhere to belong. I came for a home, not a fortune. I turned away, pushed the cabin door open. Whoever ends up taking me in it won't be for money. It'll be for this. I gestured at the cabin, the creek, the herbs drying on the table inside. For somebody who sees me, not what they can get from me. I stepped inside. Behind me, in the golden light of late afternoon, I heard Eli draw a sharp breath. Heard him whisper something too quiet to make out, something that sounded almost like a name that wasn't Eli. The storm came without warning. One moment the evening sky was streaked with purple and gold, the air still and warm. The next black clouds swallowed the canyon rim whole, and the air turned thick and charged. The kind of heaviness that pressed against your ears and made the hair on your arms stand up. Get inside. Eli was already moving toward the door, his eyes on the sky. The horse. If she breaks free, we're stranded. They barely crossed the threshold before the first drops fell, fat and heavy, striking the roof like flung gravel. Then the sky split open, and water came down in sheets so thick I couldn't see the creek anymore. I stood at the window, watching the world disappear. Lightning cracked across the darkness, illuminating the canyon in frozen white flashes. The creek was rising. I could hear it even over the rain, the roar of water finding new paths, swallowing the banks where I'd knelt just hours ago, teaching Eli about yerba mansa and Doc. The roof began to leak almost at once. First one drip, then another, then a steady stream in the corner near the cot. Water running down the wall like tears. I grabbed the bucket and positioned it beneath the worst of the flow. Water splashed against wood, a hollow drumming beneath the thunder. Over here, Eli was dragging the cot toward the far wall where the roof seemed more solid. His bad ankle forgotten in the urgency. The cot leg caught on a raised board. He yanked. His foot slipped in the spreading puddle. He went down hard, knee cracking against the floor. Let me. I was beside him in 2 steps. I've got it. He pushed himself up face tight and hauled the cot the rest of the way. Water was running in from 3 places now, maybe 4. The packed dirt floor was turning to mud, dark and slick, sucking at our boots. We worked without speaking. I gathered what I could save. The blankets, my bag, the precious herbs. Eli wrestled the table away from a growing pool, stacked our remaining food on the highest shelf he could reach. Another leak opened in the roof, then another. By midnight, the cabin had become a swamp. The corner near the hearth was the only spot still dry barely. A space maybe 4 feet square pressed against the warm stones. Kayla and Eli huddled there, backs to the wall. The single moth-eaten blanket stretched across both their shoulders. The fire had died when water found its way down the chimney, turning the coals to hissing black nothing. And now the darkness was complete except when lightning split the sky. My teeth chattered. My dress was soaked from the waist down, heavy and cold against my legs, plastered to my skin. The smell of wet wool and mud filled my nose, and beneath it, the sour smell of unwashed body. A week without a proper bath. I'd stopped noticing it until now. I drew my knees up, wrapped my arms around them, tried to make myself small. This was what my life had come to. Crouching in a leaking shack, in the middle of nowhere, covered in mud and creek water, shivering beside a man I didn't really know. No money, no prospects, no one in the world who knew or cared whether I lived or died. The woman who'd stepped off the train at Tucson Station, clean dress, hopeful, heart letter clutched in her hand like a promise. That woman seemed like a stranger now, a fool, a child who'd believed that 47 words could change her life. My mother would be ashamed. The thought hit me like a slap. I pressed my face against my knees, hiding from the darkness, hiding from Eli, hiding from myself. Kyla. His voice was barely audible above the rain hammering the roof. I lifted my head, found his face in the darkness, a pale shape. Nothing more. There's something I need to tell you. The words hung between us. I waited, my heart beating slow and heavy in my chest. I haven't been... He stopped, swallowed, started again. When you found me in that canyon, when you asked my name, Thunder exploded overhead. So close the whole cabin shook. The horse screamed outside, a sound of pure animal terror. Eli was on his feet before I could react, lurching toward the door. The horse. If she runs off? He threw the door open and disappeared into the wall of rain. I scrambled up, stumbled to the doorway. Lightning showed me the scene in frozen snapshots. Eli fighting through mud that sucked at his boots with every step. The horse rearing against her tether, eyes white with fear. Rain driving sideways in the wind, so thick it looked like smoke. I watched him grab for the reins, watched his boots slide in the muck, watched him go down. He fell hard, face first, into the mud. The horse's hooves came down inches from his head, turning the ground to black soup. He rolled, came up on his hands and knees, mud coating his face, his hair filling his mouth. He spat, grabbed for the reins again. The horse reared. He held on. For a long moment it was just the two of them, man and beast locked in a battle neither could afford to lose. Eli's bad leg buckled. He went down on one knee in the muck, sank past his ankle, but his grip on the reins didn't break. The horse screamed again, pulled, fought. Then something shifted. The animal's head dropped. Her sides heaved. She stood trembling, beaten down by the storm. Eli pulled himself upright, using the saddle for support. He led her to the lee side of the cabin, tied the reins to a post driven deep in the ground. His hands slipped twice on the wet leather. Mud ran down his face in dark streams, dripping from his chin, his nose, the ends of his hair. When he came back inside, he looked like something dragged up from the grave. Mud caked every inch of him. His clothes, his skin, the creases of his face. He stood in the doorway, water streaming off him in rivers. And for a moment he looked less like a man than something the earth had chewed up and spat out. "What were you going to tell me?" The question came out harder than I meant it to. Eli flinched like I'd struck him. "Nothing." He turned away, moved toward the dry corner, leaving a trail of muddy footprints. "It doesn't matter. It does matter." I followed him, stood blocking his path. "You were about to say something. Before the horse, before the thunder. You were going to tell me something, and I want to know what it was." Lightning flashed again. His face appeared in the white light. Mud streaked, exhausted, and something else. Something that looked like shame, burning so bright it hurt to see. "Not tonight." His voice was barely a whisper. "Please, not tonight." I studied him for a long moment. The mud in his hair, the tremor in his hands, the way he couldn't meet my eyes. I stepped aside. They didn't speak again that night. I curled into my corner, wet and cold and miserable. Eli sat against the opposite wall, the blanket draped over his shoulders, mud drying in cracks across his face. The storm raged on. But inside the cabin, a different kind of silence had taken hold. I must have slept because I woke to stillness. The rain had stopped. Gray light seeped through the cracks, showing the ruin of our shelter. Mud everywhere. Standing water in the low spots. Our belongings scattered and soaked. Eli was already up, already standing by the door, looking out at a world washed clean and new. He'd scraped most of the mud from his face, though traces still clung in his hairline behind his ears. His clothes were stiff with dried dirt. "We need to go." I pushed myself upright. Every muscle ached. "Go where? Away from here." He didn't turn around. "This place won't make it through another storm, and there's somewhere—" He stopped. Drew a breath. "Somewhere I need to take you." "Where?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, scraped, raw. "Trust me. Can you do that? Just trust me." I thought about the night before, the interrupted confession, the shame in his eyes. I thought about all the things I didn't know, all the questions he wouldn't answer. "Yes," I said. "I reckon I can." Something moved across his face. Relief, maybe, or resignation, or something too complicated to name. "Good." He turned back to the ruined cabin. "We leave soon as you're ready." The horse carried us both. I sat in front, my hands gripping the worn leather of the saddle horn. Eli sat behind me, one arm loose around my waist to keep me steady. His chest was warm against my back, solid and real through the damp fabric of our clothes. His breath stirred the hair at my temple with each exhale. They'd been riding for 2 hours. The canyon had given way to rolling hills, the hills to open grassland that stretched toward the horizon in waves of gold and brown and pale green. I had never seen so much empty space in all my life. The sky went on forever blue and endless, with clouds piled up on the horizon like mountains made of cotton. The storm had washed the world clean. Everything smelled of wet earth and sage fresh and sharp. "Where are we going?" I'd asked the question 3 times already. Each time Eli had given the same answer. "You'll see." The 4th time I stopped asking. The first rider appeared near midday. He came over a rise to the east, a dark shape against the bright sky. A young man on a paint horse driving a small herd of cattle toward a fence line in the distance. I watched him notice us, watched him wheel his horse around, watched him ride closer with the easy seat of someone born to the saddle. Eli's arm tightened around my waist. I felt the change in him, the way his breathing shifted, the way his muscles went taut. The rider pulled up 20 feet away. Dust rose from his horse's hooves, caught the sunlight, settled slow. He pushed back his hat, revealing a sun-darkened face creased with surprise. "Mr. Thornton," he touched his hat brim, respectful. "We've been looking for you, sir. Whole outfit's been out searching since Tuesday last." My spine went rigid. "Mr. Mercer." I turned my head, tried to see Eli's face. He wasn't looking at me. His jaw was set hard, his eyes fixed on the rider. "I'm fine, Tom. Had some trouble in the canyon. This woman here found me, took care of me." The rider Tom glanced at me. Curiosity flickered in his eyes there, and gone quickly hidden behind the blank face of a man who knew better than to ask questions of his betters. "Yes, sir." "Should I ride ahead? Let Mr. Dawson know you're coming in." "Do that." Tom touched his hat again, wheeled his horse, and took off at a gallop toward the horizon. I waited until he was gone, swallowed by the golden grass. Mr. Mercer. The name fell between us flat and hard. Eli said nothing. His arm stayed around my waist, but it felt different now. Heavier. That's what he called you. Mr. Mercer. Still nothing. I faced forward again, stared at the grassland stretching out before us. The distant line of fence posts, the smudge of buildings on the horizon that hadn't been there an hour ago. "You're going to explain." My voice came out steady, cold. "When we get wherever we're going, you're going to explain everything." "Yes." His voice was barely more than a breath against my hair. "I will." They passed 3 more riders before reaching the gate. Each one stopped. Each one touched his hat. Each one called him Mr. Mercer, or simply Sir, with the kind of deference that couldn't be learned or faked. The deference of men who depended on another man for their livelihood. I felt their eyes on me, curious, questioning. But nobody asked who I was. Nobody said a word beyond their greeting and their assurance that they were glad to see him safe. The buildings grew larger as they approached. What I'd taken for a single structure from far off turned out to be many. A main house with a wraparound porch, a long bunkhouse with smoke rising from its chimney, a barn bigger than any building I'd ever seen, stables, corrals, outbuildings I couldn't name. All of it spread across the landscape like a small town unto itself. And then I saw the gate. Massive posts of weathered oak silver gray with age, a crossbeam high overhead. Mounted on that crossbeam was a star 5 points wrought iron black against the blue sky. Silver Star Ranch. My hands went numb on the saddle horn. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel it pounding against my ribs, but everything else seemed very far away. Like watching myself from a great distance, like a dream I couldn't wake from. The gate stood open. Beyond it, a packed dirt road led toward the main house. 2 stories tall, white-painted rails along the porch, lace curtains in the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. Red geraniums bloomed in boxes beneath the windows, bright as drops of blood. A home, a real home, the kind I'd dreamed about in my narrow boarding house bed. The horse stopped just inside the gate. An old man came running from the barn, white hair flying beneath a battered hat, weathered face creased deep by sun and wind, bow-legged gait of someone who'd spent 60 years in the saddle. He was shouting something, words I couldn't quite make sense of. Then he was at the horse's side, looking up at Eli with tears cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "Mr. Thornton, Silas, sweet mercy, we thought you was dead. Found your hat in that canyon. All that blood on the rocks. Been searching high and low for a week now. James." The name hit me like a bucket of cold water. I turned, looked at the man behind me, really looked the way I should have looked from the very first day. His face had gone pale beneath the sunburn and the healing cuts. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. And his eyes, those gray eyes that had watched me so careful for a week now, were fixed on my face with something that looked like a man waiting for the axe to fall. Silas. The word came out wrong, crooked. He didn't deny it. James Thornton. My voice grew stronger, harder. Mercer. The man who wrote me those letters. The man who was supposed to meet me at the station. The old man, the foreman. I reckoned went quiet. His eyes moved between us, relief giving way to confusion. "Ma'am," I ignored him. I was sliding down from the horse, now my legs unsteady beneath me, my hands shaking as I gripped the saddle to keep from falling. My boots hit the packed dirt. The ground felt too solid, too real. You knew. I faced Silas, still mounted, still looking down at me with that terrible expression. From the very beginning you knew who I was. Yes, one word, no excuse, no explanation. You let me think. My voice cracked. I swallowed, started again. You let me tell you everything. My mother, the letters, why I came west, all of it. And the whole time you knew, yes. The foreman had backed away, was gesturing urgent to someone near the barn. Hands were gathering, faces appearing in doorways and around corners drawn by the commotion. I didn't care who heard, who saw, who knew. I saved your life. The words scraped out of my throat like broken glass. I pulled you out of that canyon. I sat up all night when you were burning with fever. I gave you half my food when I was starving myself. And you... I stopped, couldn't go on. The anger was choking me, rising up from somewhere deep, and underneath it was something worse, something that felt like grief. Silas swung down from the horse slowly, carefully. His bad ankle nearly gave way when his boots hit the ground, but he caught himself on the saddle, straightened, faced me. "I'm sorry, sorry." The word tasted like ashes on my tongue. "You're sorry. There's nothing I can say that will make this right." His voice was quiet, steady. The voice of a man who had made his choice and was prepared to face the consequences. "I lied to you. I tested you. I let you believe I was somebody I wasn't because I wanted to know." He met my eyes, held them, whether you were real. He gestured at the house, the barn, the land stretching out in every direction, thousands of acres, thousands of cattle, a fortune in grass and water and sky. Whether you were different from the others, whether you came out here looking for me or looking for all this. I stared at him. The anger was still there, hot and bright, but something else was pushing up beneath it, something I wasn't ready to name. "And what did you decide?" The question hung between us. All around the ranch had gone quiet, hands stopping their work, faces turning toward the two figures standing in the shadow of the iron star. Silas's throat worked. He swallowed once, twice. "You shared your last food when you thought I had nothing." His voice had dropped so low I had to strain to hear it. "You taught me about plants like I was worth teaching. You sat with me through that storm when you could have stayed warm by what was left of the fire." He took a step toward me. I didn't back away. "You asked me once what I wanted from the man who sent for you. I've thought about that question every single day since." He stopped. His hands hung at his sides, empty and open. "And the answer is, you deserve better. Better than a man who lies. Better than a man who tests people because he's too scared to trust them." I stood still as stone. The wind caught a loose strand of my hair, blew it across my face. I didn't brush it away. "So you're sending me off?" "No." The word came out sharp, almost desperate. I'm telling you the truth, finally, all of it. And then I'm asking you to choose. Choose what Silas turned pointed toward the house. That room on the second floor, the one with the windows facing east where the morning light comes in first. I had it fixed up for you, for my bride." He paused, drew a breath that shook on the way in. "There's dresses in the wardrobe books on the shelves, everything I could think of that a woman might want." He turned back to face me. "It's yours if you want it. The room, the ranch, everything I have. But only if you want it, only if you can find it in you to forgive a fool and a coward." The foreman had disappeared. The hands had drifted away, finding sudden pressing business elsewhere. It was just the two of us now, standing in the shadow of the iron star, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold and amber. I looked at the house, looked at the man, looked at the choice he was putting in my hands. "I need time." My voice came out steady. "Time to think." Something flickered across Silas's face. Relief, fear, hope, all tangled together, impossible to separate. "Take as long as you need. It might be a good while. I'll wait." Grace appeared on the porch. Broad-shouldered, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, kind eyes set deep in a weathered face. The woman who ran the boarding house in town and had become my friend. She walked down the steps, her boots making no sound on the wood. "Let her breathe, patron." She spoke with a slight accent, Mexican maybe. "You've done enough damage for one day." She took my arm gently. "Come. There's a bath waiting. Hot water, clean towels. You look like you could use both." I let her lead me toward the house. At the porch steps I stopped, turned back. "Silas." He looked up, hope naked on his face. "Those letters you wrote me, those 47 words." I held his gaze, searching for the truth of him. Were any of them real? He didn't hesitate. Every last one. I studied his face for a long moment. Then I climbed the steps, crossed the porch, and disappeared through the door. The room smelled of lavender and lemon oil. I stood in the doorway, unable to move. The bed was made up with a white quilt, hand-stitched in a pattern of interlocking wedding rings. A wardrobe of dark oak stood against one wall, its doors slightly open to show the edges of fabric inside. Calico gingham, something that might have been blue silk. A washstand held a porcelain basin painted with tiny roses. A rocking chair sat by the window, positioned to catch the morning light. He'd prepared all of this for me, for a woman he'd never met. The woman who'd led me upstairs, who'd introduced herself as Grace the housekeeper, stepped aside. "Take your time. There's soap and towels by the basin, fresh clothes in the wardrobe. I'll bring up some food once you've had a chance to wash." She left, closing the door softly behind her. I crossed to the window. The glass was wavy with age, distorting the view, but I could see the land rolling away toward the horizon. Fences, cattle moving in slow clusters across the grass. The glint of water where a creek wound through the pasture. His land, his cattle, his creek, his lie. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes. What did I want? The question had followed me all the way from Fort Apache. I had told myself I wanted safety, a roof, walls, a place where I belonged. But standing in this room prepared for a woman who hadn't existed yet, a bride Silas Mercer had dreamed into being, I understood that I'd been lying to myself, too. I wanted to matter. To someone. To anyone. And for 10 days in a leaking cabin I had. The knock came an hour later. I'd washed my face in the porcelain basin, the water cool and clean, smelling faintly of roses from the soap. I'd combed the tangles from my hair with a silver-backed brush I'd found on the dresser, changed into one of the dresses from the wardrobe, a simple blue cotton. Nothing fancy but clean and whole in ways my own clothes hadn't been in weeks. I looked at myself in the mirror above the washstand. The face looking back was thinner than I remembered, older, but the eyes were the same, my mother's eyes, dark and steady. "Come in." The door opened. Silas stood on the threshold, hat in his hands. He was still wearing the mud-stained clothes from the road. He'd washed his face and hands, but dirt still clung in the creases of his neck beneath his fingernails. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. "May I?" I nodded. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, stood with his back against it, turning his hat in his hands around and around. The silence stretched. "You wanted an explanation," Silas said at last. "A real one, not what I said out there at the gate." I sat in the rocking chair by the window, folded my hands in my lap, the way my mother had taught me. Waited. Silas moved to the center of the room, stopped. His fingers worried at the hat brim. 3 years back, a woman came to this ranch. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor. Name was Catherine. She answered an advertisement. Same as you, said all the right things, smiled the right way. He paused, swallowed. I married her inside a month. Thought I'd found... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter what I thought. What matters is that 6 weeks later, she was gone. Took $2,000 from my safe and ran off with a gambler from Abilene. My hands tightened in my lap. I sent men after her. They found her. Turned out she was already married. Had been the whole time. The gambler was her husband. They'd been running the same game for years. Territory to territory, ranch to ranch. Silas's jaw clenched. The hat brim crumpled under his grip. When your letter came, your first letter, I figured here we go again. Another woman with a sad story and sweet words. He shook his head slowly. But something about the way you wrote, I couldn't stop puzzling over it. Couldn't stop wondering if maybe this time might be different. He looked at me then finally. I was riding to meet you at the station. That's how I ended up in that canyon. I was on my way to you. And then the rocks came down. And when I woke up, his voice cracked on the words, you were there, and you didn't know who I was. Didn't know about the ranch or the money or any of it. You just saw a man who needed help. I stood, walked to the window, looked out at the fading light. So you lied. I tested. The word came out bitter, aimed at himself. I told myself it was different, but it wasn't. I lied to you because I was scared. Because the last time I let myself trust somebody, she took everything I had and laughed while she did it. I'm not her. I know that. Silas moved closer, stopped when there was still space between us. I knew it that first night when you sat up with me through the fever. I knew it when you gave me half your food. I knew it every single day. He paused, but I couldn't. His voice broke. I turned, saw the tears he was fighting to hold back, the way his whole body trembled with the effort of keeping himself upright. I couldn't make myself tell you, because as long as I didn't say the words, I could keep pretending. Pretending you might still choose me when you found out. Pretending I hadn't already ruined everything. The silence that followed was different from before. Softer somehow. The anger was still there in my chest. I could feel it coiled tight beneath my ribs. But something else was rising alongside it. Understanding, or the beginning of it. You should have told me. My voice was quiet. That first morning when you woke up and saw me. I know. You should have trusted me. I know. I don't know if I can forgive you. Silas nodded. His cheeks were wet now, tears cutting tracks through what remained of the dust. I know that too. I looked at him. Really looked. At the lines around his eyes deeper than they'd been a week ago. At the gray coming in at his temples. At the weariness that went deeper than exhaustion. The weariness of a man who had built an empire and still felt poor. Who had everything the world could offer and trusted none of it. A man who was terrified I would walk away. When I shared what little I had. My voice was steady now. Certain. You looked at it like nobody had ever been kind to you before. Silas's throat moved. He didn't speak. That's when I knew something wasn't right. Not wrong with you, wrong with your life. Something had happened to make you forget what simple kindness looked like. I crossed to him, stopped an arm's length away. I came out here looking for a roof and 4 walls. That's what I told myself. But that's not why I stayed in that canyon. Not why I carried you to the cabin or sat up through the fever or taught you about plants down by the creek. Then why? The question was barely more than a breath. I reached out, took the ruined hat from his hands, set it on the bed. because you needed somebody. And I was there. The porch faced west. I sat in a wooden chair watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The sky had turned to watercolors, orange and pink and purple, colors I'd never seen in the cities back east. A meadowlark sang somewhere in the grass, its evening song clear and sweet. Silas stood a few feet away, leaning against a post. He hadn't spoken since we'd come downstairs. Neither had I. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was the silence of two people learning each other's rhythms, figuring out how to share space. "I lied to you," Silas said finally. "Yes, I don't have any words that can make it right. No." The sun touched the horizon. Golden light spilled across the grassland, painting the world in shades of honey and amber. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered. A cowbell clanked in the distance. Peaceful and familiar. "I need time." My voice was quiet but firm. "To figure out whether I can trust you. To sort out what I want." Silas nodded. "However long you need. It might be weeks, might be months. I'll wait." I looked at him, at the lines of his face softened by the dying light. "That room upstairs, the one you fixed up. Yes, you said it has everything a woman could want, everything I could think of." I turned back to the sunset. The colors were deepening now, orange fading to rose, pink darkening to purple. "It doesn't have the most important thing." Silas went still. "What's that trust?" My voice was steady. "That's the one thing you can't buy or build or set out pretty on a shelf. It has to be earned." I stood, walked to the porch rail, rested my hands on the smooth wood still warm from the day's sun, but I'm willing to give it a chance to grow. I looked over my shoulder at him. "If you are." Silas straightened, took a step toward me, stopped. "I am." 2 words, 47 had brought me here. 2 might be enough to make me stay. I turned back to the sunset. The last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky began its slow turn toward night. A single star appeared in the east, the first star of evening, bright and steady. Starlight, star bright, I thought, and almost smiled at the memory. My mother standing at the window of our tiny room, teaching me the old rhyme. Behind me I heard Silas move to the rail, felt him stand beside me, close but not touching. They watched the stars come out together, one by one, scattered across the darkening sky like seeds waiting to grow. I thought about my mother, about providence and second chances, about kindness given without expecting anything in return, and a man who'd written words he meant, not forgiven, not yet. Maybe not for a good while yet, but here, both of us choosing to stay. And for now, for tonight, that was enough. The morning came bright and clear. I woke in the room with the east-facing windows, sunlight streaming across the white quilt, warming my face. For a moment I didn't know where I was. Then it all came back. Silver Star Ranch, Silas Mercer. The truth finally spoken. I rose and dressed in another of the dresses from the wardrobe, a simple gray cotton with small white flowers, brushed my hair and pinned it back, looked at myself in the mirror, the same face, the same eyes. But something had shifted overnight, some small thing I couldn't quite name. Downstairs I found the kitchen. Grace was there rolling out dough on a flour-dusted table. The smell of coffee filled the air, rich and dark. "Good morning," Grace smiled. "There's breakfast on the stove, coffee in the pot. Help yourself. Where's Silas out with the hands?" "Dawn patrol, checking the fence lines." She punched down the dough with practiced efficiency. "He'll be back by mid-morning." I poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug, sat at the table. The kitchen was warm, and bright copper pots hanging from hooks, dried herbs bundled on the windowsill. "How long have you worked here?" I asked. 5 years. Grace shaped the dough into a round. "Since my husband passed. Mr. Silas took me in when I had nowhere else to go." She looked up, met my eyes. "He's a good man. Stubborn. Wounded, but good." I sipped the coffee. It was strong and bitter and exactly what I needed. He lied to me. I know. Grace began cutting the dough into biscuits. And that was wrong. But I watched him this past week. Watched him pace the porch every evening, wondering if you'd found shelter, if you were safe. Watched him send riders out looking, even though he had no idea where you'd gone. She placed the biscuits on a pan. A man who didn't care wouldn't have worried. A man who was just testing wouldn't have lost sleep. I thought about that. About Silas alone on this ranch, wondering if I'd survived the canyon, if I'd made it to town, if I'd given up and gone back east. The door opened. Silas stepped in, hat in hand, boots dusty from the morning ride. He stopped when he saw me. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or relief. Morning? His voice was careful. Morning? Grace excused herself, wiping her hands on her apron, leaving us alone. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but weighted. I've been thinking, I set down the coffee mug, about what you said yesterday. Silas waited. You said you wanted to know if I was real, if I was different from her, from Catherine. Yes. But you never gave me the same chance. You never let me see who you really were. You tested me while hiding behind a lie. The words landed heavy between us. Silas's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly. You're right. So here's what I'm asking. I stood faced him across the kitchen table. No more lies. No more tests. If we're going to try this, if there's any chance of trust growing here, you have to let me see you. The real you. Not the wounded man in the cabin, not the rich rancher, just Silas. He met my eyes, held them. And in return I'll stay. Not forever, not yet. But long enough to see if what we had in that cabin sharing cornbread and learning about plants, if that was real too. Silas set his hat on the table, crossed to where I stood, stopped a respectful distance away. 1 week turned into 2, 2 weeks became 4. 5 weeks passed, then 6. I spent my days learning the rhythms of Silver Star Ranch, helped Grace in the kitchen, tended a small garden behind the house where I planted the herbs I'd gathered by the creek, yarrow and yerba mansa and willow. They took root in the Arizona soil like they'd been waiting for me. The cowboys were wary at first, an Apache woman living in the big house, the boss's intended bride. They didn't know what to make of me. Then Tom Wade, the young cowboy who'd first spotted us riding in, came down with fever, high and sudden, shaking so hard his teeth rattled. The nearest doctor was 3 hours away. I can help, I told Silas. He didn't hesitate. Whatever you need. I made the same tea I'd given Silas. Willow bark steeped in hot water, applied cool cloths. Sat with Tom through the worst of it while the other hands watched from the doorway, uncertain. By morning, the fever had broken. After that, they started coming to me. Rope burns, saddle sores, a gashed hand from barbed wire. I treated them all, and slowly their wariness turned to respect. Silas and I fell into a pattern. Breakfast together in the kitchen, evenings on the porch watching the sunset. We talked about small things, the weather, the cattle, his plans for the ranch. Sometimes we talked about bigger things, his childhood in Texas, my years on the reservation. The dreams we'd had before life taught us to dream smaller. He never pressed, never asked for more than I was willing to give. And slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice the wall between us began to crumble. One evening, a month after I'd arrived, Silas found me in the garden. I was on my knees in the dirt transplanting sage seedlings, my hands dark with soil. Can I help? I looked up, surprised. You want to garden? I want to learn. He knelt beside me, awkward but willing. Show me what to do. So I taught him how to dig the hole deep enough, how to cradle the roots without crushing them, how to water just enough but not too much. We worked in silence for a while, the evening light turning golden around us. This reminds me of the creek. Silas said quietly, when you taught me about the plants. I glanced at him. His hands were gentle with the seedlings, careful not to damage them. That was real, he said. Those days in the cabin, learning from you, sharing what little we had. That was the most real thing in my life in years. I sat back, wiped my forehead with the back of my hand, leaving a streak of dirt. For me, too. Our eyes met, held. Something passed between us. Not forgiveness, not quite, but understanding, recognition, the acknowledgement that what we'd built in that forgotten cabin had been worth saving, worth fighting for. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Silas brought it to me where I was hanging herbs to dry in the kitchen. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "What is it?" This came from Abilene. His voice was flat, from a lawyer. He handed me the envelope. I pulled out the single sheet, read the formal language, the legal threats. Catherine, his first wife, the one who'd run off with the gambler. She was claiming the marriage had been legal after all, that she was entitled to half of everything he owned. "She's coming back," Silas said, "and she'll do anything to destroy this." I folded the letter carefully, set it on the table, then we'll deal with it. Together. "Kayla, I'm not leaving." I met his eyes, held them steady. Not because of her, not because of fear. If I'm going to leave, it'll be my choice, not hers. Something shifted in his expression, hope fierce and bright. "You mean that I thought about the past month? The slow building of trust? The careful construction of something new on the ruins of what had been broken? Yes, I mean it. Because somewhere along the way between the cornbread and the herbs and the quiet evenings watching the sunset, I'd stopped running towards something and started running towards someone. And that made all the difference." Catherine Ashford Mercer arrived at Silver Star Ranch on a Tuesday morning in late July, when the heat lay thick as a wool blanket over the grasslands, and even the cattle moved slow through the shimmering air. I was in the garden behind the house harvesting yarrow for drying when I heard the carriage, the sound of wheels on gravel, the jingle of harness, the clipped commands of a hired driver. I straightened, shading my eyes against the sun, and watched a black carriage pull up to the main house. The woman who stepped out was everything I wasn't, tall where I was average, fair where I was dark. Dressed in a traveling suit of deep purple silk with jet buttons that caught the light, a hat with ostrich feathers perched at an angle on her golden hair. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her welcome anywhere. Grace appeared at my elbow, wiping her hands on her apron. That's her. The first wife. I know. We watched as Silas came out onto the porch. He'd been in his office going over the ranch books. Now he stood on the top step, his face unreadable, his body tense as a drawn bow. Catherine looked up at him and smiled. Even from a distance I could see the calculation in it, the practiced warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "James." Her voice carried across the yard, pitched to sound delighted, relieved. "Darling, I've been so worried. When I heard about the accident..." She started up the steps. Silas didn't move to help her. "What are you doing here, Catherine?" The smile faltered just for a moment, then it was back brighter than before. "I came as soon as I received word you were injured. I was beside myself with concern. Your concern is 3 years too late." Her hand went to her throat, a gesture of wounded innocence I recognized even though I'd never seen it before. My mother used to talk about women like this, women who wore their beauty like armor and their helplessness like a weapon. "James, please. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I've changed. I've come back to make things right. You made your choice when you ran off with $2,000 and a gambler." Catherine's eyes swept the porch, the yard, and landed on me standing by the garden. Her expression shifted, hardened. "I see you've wasted no time finding a replacement." She looked me up and down, taking in my plain dress, my dirt-stained hands, my sun-darkened skin. "An Indian, James, really? How progressive of you." Grace's hand found mine, squeezed hard. Silas came down the steps, his movements deliberate, controlled. He stopped between Catherine and the garden, blocking her view of me. "Her name is Kayla. She's a guest in my house. You, on the other hand, are trespassing. I have a right to be here. This is still legally my home." "Your lawyer's letter said otherwise." Silas's voice was cold. "You want to make claims, you do it through the courts, not on my porch." Catherine's smile turned sharp. "Very well. I'll see you in court then. And James." When the judge hears how you replaced me before our marriage was even properly dissolved, when he hears about your Indian mistress, she's not my mistress. Silas cut her off. She's the woman who saved my life when I was left for dead in a canyon. She's worth 10 of you. The words hung in the hot air. Catherine's face went hard. All pretense of sweetness vanished. We'll see what the judge thinks. She turned back to her carriage. And James, I'm not leaving Tucson until I get what I'm owed. She climbed into the carriage. The driver snapped the reins and they pulled away in a cloud of dust. Silas stood watching until they disappeared. Then his shoulders sagged. I crossed the yard to him. Grace had gone back inside, giving us privacy. You didn't have to defend me like that. Yes, I did. He turned to face me. Because it's true. Every word. What she said about the judge, she's going to make this ugly. I know. He ran a hand through his hair. She'll drag your name through the mud. She'll tell everyone you're... He stopped. An Indian who doesn't belong, I finished for him. Kyla, I've heard worse. I've survived worse. The question is, can you? He looked at me for a long moment. With you beside me? Yes. Then we fight. The next morning, a rider came from town. Sheriff William Carter, a man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. He sat his horse with the ease of someone who'd spent half his life in the saddle. Mr. Mercer. Ma'am. He tipped his hat to each of us. We were on the porch having breakfast. Grace had brought out fresh biscuits and coffee, and for a brief moment it had felt almost normal. Sheriff. Silas set down his cup. What brings you out? Got some questions. About a claim that's been filed. He dismounted, tied his horse to the rail. Mrs. Catherine Thornton says you're unlawfully preventing her from accessing her property. This isn't her property. It never was. That'll be for the judge to decide. Carter climbed the steps. In the meantime, I've been asked to investigate certain allegations. His eyes slid to me. About the nature of Miss... He paused, waiting for me to fill in the name. Kayla. Miss Kayla's presence here. I stood, met his gaze directly. I'm a guest of Mr. Mercer's, nothing more. Mrs. Catherine claims otherwise. She says you've been living here as his mistress for over a month. That you were traveling together alone for days before arriving at the ranch. We were in a cabin. I was treating his injuries. Convenient. Carter pulled out a small notebook. And before that, where were you coming from? Fort Apache Reservation. Before that, Tucson. Doing what? Working. At a laundry owned by a man named Wong. Carter wrote this down. And how did you come to be in that canyon at exactly the right time to find Mr. Mercer? I was walking to Crestwood. He was supposed to meet me at Tucson Station, but didn't show. I decided not to wait. Why was he supposed to meet you? The question hung there. Silas stood. Because I sent for her. I placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride. She answered. I was on my way to meet her when the accident happened. Carter's eyebrows rose. So you're saying this woman is your fiancée? Yes. And yet you've been living under the same roof for over a month without a wedding? That's her choice. Silas's voice was steady. I've asked. She's asked for time to be sure. I'm giving her that time. Carter looked between us, his expression skeptical. Awful convenient timing. Your first wife shows up claiming her rights, and suddenly this Indian woman is your intended... Watch your tone, Sheriff. Silas's voice went cold. Kayla saved my life. She stayed up all night keeping me alive when anyone else would have left me to die. She's earned respect and she'll get it. From you and everyone else. Carter tucked away his notebook. I'll put all this in my report. But Mr. Mercer, word of advice. Get yourself a good lawyer. This is going to get messy. After he left, I sat down on the porch steps, suddenly tired. Silas sat beside me. This is my fault. I should have been more careful. Should have thought about how it would look. You were dying. I don't think you had time to worry about appearances. Still. He was quiet for a moment. If this damages your reputation, my reputation, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Silas. I'm a half Apache woman with no family, no money, no prospects. My reputation was damaged the day I was born. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. The world sees what it wants to see. Catherine knows that. She's using it against us. Then we make them see the truth. How, I don't know yet, but we'll find a way. That afternoon I walked into town. Grace had offered to come with me, but I needed to do this alone. Needed to see with my own eyes what we were up against. Crestwood wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, and a handful of other buildings clustered together like sheep seeking shelter from the wind. But it was the closest thing to civilization for 50 miles, and right now it was buzzing with gossip. I felt the stares as soon as I walked down the main street. Women in their good dresses standing outside the general store, their conversation stopping mid-sentence when they saw me. Men lounging on the saloon steps, their eyes following my progress with open curiosity. I kept my head high and walked into the general store. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous manner, looked up from his ledger. "Help you, I need thread, and needles, and some cotton fabric if you have it." He hesitated, then pulled out what I asked for. Set it on the counter without meeting my eyes. "That'll be $2. I counted out the coins from the small amount Silas had given me for household expenses. Behind me the door opened. 2 women came in their skirts, rustling. I recognized them from the porch. They moved to the far side of the store, but their voices carried. "Can you believe it, living in sin right there at Silver Star? I heard she's Apache. Half-breed anyway. Poor Mr. Mercer. First that awful Catherine woman, now this. He does have terrible luck with women. He should send her back to the reservation where she belongs." I gathered my purchases, turned to leave. One of the women gasped, "Oh, we weren't." I walked past them without a word out into the bright afternoon sun. My hands were shaking. I made it to the edge of town before I had to stop, lean against a fence post, breathe. This was what we were facing, not just Catherine and her lawyers, not just the courts, but this, the whispers, the judgment, the assumption that I was something dirty, something shameful, something to be sent away. I was halfway back to the ranch when I heard hoofbeats behind me. I turned. A man on a large black horse was approaching. Not Silas, someone I'd never seen before. He pulled up beside me. He was well-dressed in a suit that must have cost more than I'd earned in a year at the laundry. Clean-shaven, with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. "Miss Kyla." I presume I didn't answer. "Allow me to introduce myself. Richard Blackwell. I'm Mrs. Catherine Mercer's attorney." I kept walking. He rode alongside me, his horse's hooves kicking up dust. "I wanted to speak with you privately, away from Mr. Mercer's influence. I have nothing to say to you. I think you do." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded paper. "This is a letter of credit for $500. It's yours if you leave Arizona Territory. Today." I stopped walking, looked up at him. "You're trying to bribe me. I'm offering you a way out." Blackwell leaned down from his saddle. "You're in over your head, Miss Kayla. Catherine Mercer has money, connections, lawyers. She'll destroy you in court. She'll make sure everyone in this territory knows what you are. What I am. A half-breed who seduced a wealthy man while he was vulnerable. An Indian woman who doesn't know her place." The words landed like blows, but they don't have to. He held out the letter. "Take the money. Go back to Fort Apache, or California, or anywhere you want. Start fresh. No one needs to know." I looked at the letter. $500. More money than I'd ever had in my life. Enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere I wouldn't be Silas Mercer's Indian mistress, somewhere I could just be Kayla. It would be so easy. "No." The word came out strong. "Certain." Blackwell's smile faded. "Don't be foolish. You can't win this. Maybe not." I started walking again, but I'm not running either. You'll regret this. I've regretted plenty of things in my life. I called back over my shoulder. Standing up for myself won't be one of them. When I got back to the ranch, Silas was waiting on the porch. He knew. I could see it in his face. Someone had already told him about Blackwell. "He tried to buy you off. It wasn't a question." "Yes," and I said no. Silas's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, they were bright. "You didn't have to do that. $500 is a lot of money. I know exactly how much it is. I climbed the porch steps. It's enough to make me forget who I am. That's too high a price. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But I'm here anyway. We stood there, hands clasped, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the western hills. Tomorrow, he said, we go to town, we find our own lawyer, and we fight. Tomorrow, I agreed. But tonight, we had this porch, this sunset, this quiet moment before the storm. It would have to be enough. The lawyer's office was above the general store. A narrow staircase led up to a single room with a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with law books that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. Samuel Pierce was a man in his 60s with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He listened without interrupting as Silas explained everything: the advertisement, the letters, my arrival, the accident, the cabin, Catherine's return. When Silas finished, Pierce sat back in his chair. It's a difficult case. Can we win? That depends. He looked at me. Miss Kayla, you understand that everything about you will be questioned. Your heritage, your character, your motives. I understand. They'll say terrible things. They already are. Pierce nodded slowly. Very well. Then here's what we'll need. He pulled out a clean sheet of paper. Witnesses who can testify to the legitimacy of your relationship, documentation of the advertisement and letters, proof that Catherine's first marriage was still valid when she married Mr. Mercer, which would make their marriage void. I can get the hospital records from Fort Apache, Silas said. The doctor who confirmed Kayla never stole any morphine. And there's Tom Wade. She saved his life. Half the ranch saw it. Good. Pierce wrote this down. We'll also need character witnesses from the community. People who can speak to Miss Kayla's good character. There was a pause. That might be harder. Silas's voice was tight. Why? Because they're already calling her my mistress, my Indian mistress, as if those two things together make her less than human. Pierce looked at me over his spectacles. Is that true? People believe what they want to believe. I met his gaze. But the truth is simple. I answered an advertisement. I came west hoping for a home. I found a man dying in a canyon and saved his life. Everything else is just noise. Well said. Pierce made another note. We go to trial in 2 weeks. Between now and then we gather evidence. And Miss Kayla. Yes, you might want to stay out of town. Let things cool down. I've spent my whole life staying out of sight. I stood. I'm done hiding. The next Sunday I went to church. Grace had offered to come with me, but again I needed to do this alone. Needed to show them I wasn't ashamed. Wasn't going to slink away like something dirty. The church was a simple wooden building with a white steeple and narrow windows. I arrived early before the congregation gathered. The minister, Reverend Joseph Hart, was in his office preparing his sermon. He looked up when I knocked. His face was weathered but kind, with the deep lines of someone who'd spent a lifetime listening to other people's troubles. Miss Kayla, I've heard much about you. I'm sure you have. He gestured to a chair. Please, sit. I sat, my hands folded in my lap. I know what people are saying, Reverend. I know what Catherine Mercer's lawyer is claiming. I wanted you to hear the truth from me, so I told him, all of it, the advertisement, the journey west, finding Silas in the canyon, the cabin, the fever, the choice to stay. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Why did you come here today? To worship, and to show them I'm not afraid. You're braver than most. I'm desperate. There's a difference. Outside I could hear voices, the congregation arriving, families in their Sunday best gathering on the church steps, their chatter and laughter filtering through the walls. Hart stood. Come, we'll go in together. The talking stopped when we entered. Every head turned. I felt their eyes on me like physical weight, saw the women pull their children closer, saw the men's faces harden. I kept my chin up and followed Hart to a pew near the front. I sat alone. The pew beside me remained empty even as the church filled. Families squeezed together rather than sit next to the Indian woman. Hart began his sermon. His text was from the Gospel. The story of the Good Samaritan, a man beaten and left for dead on the road, the priest and the Levite who passed by without helping, the Samaritan, the outsider, the one they despised, who stopped and saved him. Hart's voice rang through the small church. We talk much about charity, about loving our neighbors. But when that neighbor looks different, speaks different, comes from a people we've been taught to fear, do we pass by on the other side of the road? Silence. Uncomfortable shifting. There is a woman among us today who found a man dying in a canyon. She didn't ask his name, didn't ask his wealth, didn't ask if he deserved her help. She simply helped. She sat up all night keeping him alive. She gave him her last food when she was hungry. She asked for nothing in return. He paused, let his eyes sweep the congregation. That woman is sitting in this church right now, and she sits alone. Because we who claim to follow the teachings of Christ, who speak so easily of charity and grace, cannot bring ourselves to sit beside her. The words landed like stones. I ask you, Hart continued, his voice soft, but carrying who truly lives the gospel. The woman who saves a stranger's life, or those of us who judge her for the color of her skin. The sermon continued, but I barely heard it. My throat was tight. My eyes burned. When the service ended, people filed out quickly, avoiding my gaze, avoiding Hart's too. I was gathering myself to leave when I felt someone sit down beside me. I turned. It was Grace. You didn't have to come? Yes, I did. She took my hand. You shouldn't be alone. The door opened again. Tom Wade came in, hat in his hands, looking nervous. He slid into the pew on my other side. Miss Kyla. He nodded. Ma'am, Tom, what are you doing? Sitting with the woman who saved my life. He looked straight ahead. Seemed like the right thing to do. One by one others came. Sam Cooper, the old foreman, 3 other cowboys from Silver Star. A woman I'd never met, middle-aged, with work-roughened hands. I'm Anna. She sat in the pew behind us. You helped my boy last month. Fever. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, but you came anyway. Made him tea. Sat with him. He's well now. My vision blurred. Thank you, I managed. No, ma'am. Thank you. By the time we left the church, there were 12 people around me. Not many. Not even a quarter of the congregation. But enough. Enough to show me I wasn't alone. The trial began on a Thursday morning when the heat was already oppressive and the courtroom smelled of sweat and dust and too many bodies pressed into too small a space. Judge Harrison presided, a man in his 60s with iron gray hair and a face that gave nothing away. He sat behind his bench like a granite monument, impassive and unmovable. Catherine sat at the plaintiff's table with Blackwell. She was dressed in black, playing the wronged wife. Her eyes were red as if she'd been crying, though I noticed she had no trouble meeting my gaze with cold calculation. Silas and I sat with Samuel Pierce. My hands were folded in my lap to hide their shaking. I wore the blue dress I'd worn that first day. Simple, clean, honest. Blackwell rose to give his opening statement. Your Honor, this is a simple case, Mrs. Catherine Thornton entered into a lawful marriage with James Thornton 3 years ago. That marriage was never properly dissolved. Therefore, she retains all legal rights as his wife, including rights to his property. He paced in front of the jury. 12 men, all white, all landowners. Furthermore, we will show that Mr. Mercer has been living in sin with this Indian woman, this Kayla, for over a month. That he brought her into his home while still legally married. That he has violated the sacred bonds of matrimony and the moral standards of this community. His voice rose. We will show that this woman is exactly what she appears to be. A scheming opportunist who saw a wealthy man in a vulnerable moment and attached herself to him like a leech, who now stands between a lawful wife and her rightful property. He sat down. The courtroom buzzed. I felt the eyes on me, felt the judgment. Pierce stood. He was smaller than Blackwell, quieter. But his voice carried. Your Honor, this case is indeed simple, but not in the way my colleague suggests. The facts are, these Catherine Thornton abandoned her husband 3 years ago. She was never legally married to Mr. Thornton because her first marriage was never dissolved. He turned to the jury. As for Miss Kayla, she is guilty of nothing but kindness. She found a dying man in a canyon. She saved his life. She asked for nothing, expected nothing. When she learned who he was, she could have demanded payment, could have threatened exposure. Instead, she asked only for time to decide if she could trust him. Pierce moved closer to the jury box. This is not a case about property. It's a case about character, and we will show you beyond any doubt whose character is worthy of your respect. He sat down. The judge looked at both tables. Proceed, Mr. Blackwell. The prosecution's case unfolded over 2 days. Blackwell called witnesses from Crestwood. The proprietor of the general store who testified he'd seen Silas and me together, alone, unchaperoned. The women who'd gossiped in his store, now repeating their suspicions under oath. He called the driver who'd brought Catherine to the ranch, who testified to her distress at seeing another woman in her home. He called a banker from Abilene who claimed Catherine's first marriage had been annulled, making her marriage to Silas valid. Through it all, I sat still and silent. Let them say their piece. Let them paint me however they wanted. Pierce cross-examined each one, quiet, methodical, relentless. Mr. Harris, when you saw Mr. Mercer and Miss Kyla together, were they behaving inappropriately? Well, no, but were they touching? Kissing, anything improper? No. Were they simply walking, talking? Yes. And this offended you because, pause, because she's Indian. Thank you for your honesty. One by one, Pierce dismantled their testimony, showed that their objections were based on prejudice, not evidence, that they'd seen nothing improper, just assumed it because of who I was. On the third day, it was our turn. Pierce called Tom Wade first. Tom told the story of the snake bite, how I'd saved him when everyone else had given up, how the other remedy would have been amputation. She knew exactly what to do, made medicine from plants by the creek, sat with me all night. I'm here because of her. Blackwell tried to shake him. Isn't it true that Mr. Mercer ordered you to testify? No, sir. I'm here because it's right, and you're not concerned about your job if you don't say what he wants. Mr. Mercer's a fair man. He wouldn't fire me for telling the truth. Tom's voice was steady. And the truth is, Miss Kayla saved my life. Sam Cooper testified next, told how Silas had sent riders out looking for me when I didn't arrive, how worried he'd been. He wasn't thinking about testing her. He was thinking she might be dead in that canyon, and it would be his fault for not being there. Anna, the mother whose son I'd helped, testified to my character. She came when the doctor wouldn't, didn't ask for money, didn't ask for anything, just helped because she could. Reverend Hart testified to the sermon, to the congregation's reaction. I have seen this community condemn this woman for the color of her skin. I have not seen anyone condemn her for her actions, which have been nothing but kind and good. Finally, Pierce called Silas. He took the stand, his face grave, his voice steady. Pierce led him through the story, the advertisement, the letters, the accident, the cabin. When you woke up and saw Miss Kyla, what did you think I thought I was dreaming? Silas's eyes found mine across the courtroom. She looked like an angel. What happened in that cabin? She saved my life again and again, through the fever, through the pain. She gave me her food, taught me about medicine, asked for nothing. Why didn't you tell her who you were? Silas was quiet for a moment, because I was afraid. My first wife had lied to me, stolen from me. I thought every woman who came west was looking for money. He paused. I wanted to see if Kayla was different. And was she? Yes. His voice cracked slightly. She gave me half her cornbread when she thought I was a poor ranch hand with nothing. She's the most honest person I've ever met. Do you love her? The courtroom went silent. Silas looked at me, held my eyes. Yes, I love her. And I'm asking her to marry me. Not because Catherine is making claims, but because she's everything I've been looking for, everything I don't deserve. Blackwell stood. How convenient. You discover this love just when it serves your legal interests. I discovered it, Silas said evenly, when she was crushing yarrow by firelight with bleeding hands, making medicine to keep me alive. Everything since has just been me catching up to what I already knew. The judge called a recess. Pierce turned to me. Now you. Are you ready? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was. When we reconvened, I took the stand. My hands were shaking. I gripped the rail to steady them. Pierce approached gently. Miss Kyla, tell us in your own words, why did you come to Arizona? I came because I had nowhere else to go. My mother had died. I was working for barely enough to eat. I saw the advertisement and thought, maybe this could be a chance at something better. What did you hope to find? A home? Just a home. Somewhere I belonged. Did you know Mr. Mercer was wealthy? Not until I got to Tucson Station. The station master told me. And what did you think then? I thought it didn't matter. I hadn't come for money. I'd come for walls and a roof and maybe someone who wouldn't judge me for my blood. Tell us about the canyon. So I did. Every detail. Finding the horse. Following the blood. Digging him out with my bare hands. Why didn't you just ride for help? Because he was bleeding. Because the sun was setting. Because my grandmother taught me you don't walk past someone in need. Even though he was a stranger, especially because he was a stranger. That's when kindness matters most. Pierce let that sit for a moment. What happened in the cabin? I told them about the fever, the herbs, the long night, sharing the cornbread. When did you learn his real name? When the sheriff came to the cabin. He called him Mr. Thornton. How did you feel? Angry, betrayed, hurt. Did you leave? No. Why not? Because... I paused, searching for the right words. Because I understood. He'd been hurt before. He was scared. And fear makes people do foolish things. I've done plenty of foolish things out of fear. Do you love him? The question hung in the air. I looked at Silas, at the man who'd lied to me, who'd tested me, who'd also shared cornbread and learned about plants, and looked at me like I was something precious. Yes, I love him. Blackwell rose for cross-examination. He circled me like a predator. You're Apache. Half. Your people have been at war with settlers for decades. My people have been trying to survive. There's a difference. Isn't it true you were forced off the Fort Apache reservation? I was falsely accused of theft. The charges were never proven. Convenient. He smiled coldly. Just like it's convenient that you happen to be in that canyon. That you happened to save the wealthiest man in the territory. That you're now claiming to be his fiancé. I'm not claiming anything. I'm telling the truth. The truth. He leaned closer. The truth is you're a half-breed Indian with no family, no money, no prospects. You saw an opportunity and you took it. I saw a man dying and I saved him. You saw a fortune and you attached yourself to it. If I wanted money, I'd have taken the $500 your client offered me. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Blackwell's face had gone red. That's a lie. Is it? I met his eyes. You approached me on the road to the ranch. You offered me a letter of credit for $500 to leave Arizona. I said no. The judge looked at Blackwell. Is this true? Blackwell sputtered. It was a settlement offer, Your Honor. Perfectly legal. It's also proof. Pierce stood. Proof that they know their case is weak. That they're trying to buy off witnesses. The judge made a note. Blackwell tried again. You've been living in Mr. Mercer's house for over a month. In a separate room. As a guest, without a chaperone. Grace Holloway has been there every day, without being married. Because I asked for time, because I wanted to be sure, because unlike some people, I don't rush into marriage for money. The words landed. Blackwell tried a few more questions, but the damage was done. I'd made him look desperate, made Catherine's case look exactly like what it was. A money grab. He dismissed me. I stepped down my legs weak and returned to my seat. Silas reached for my hand under the table. I let him take it. The closing arguments came the next morning. Blackwell went first, trying to salvage his case. He talked about the sanctity of marriage, about proper behavior, about the moral decay of allowing Indians to live as equals with whites. It was ugly, hateful, but I could see it wasn't landing with the jury the way he'd hoped. They looked uncomfortable. Several wouldn't meet his eyes. Pierce's closing was simple. Gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the evidence. Catherine Mercer abandoned her husband, stole from him, was already married to another man. Her marriage to Silas Mercer was never valid. He walked to where I sat. You've also heard about Kayla, a woman who saved a stranger's life, who asked for nothing in return, who turned down money to stay with a man she loves. He turned back to the jury. The question before you is simple. Who do you believe, the woman who ran away or the woman who stayed? The judge called the noon recess. Pierce turned to me. We did well. But Blackwell's desperate. Watch yourself tonight. I nodded, but his warning proved prophetic. That evening, as Grace and I prepared dinner at the boarding house, the door burst open. 4 men stood in the entrance. 3 wore range clothes, the 4th a black duster. The leader, a man with a scar running from temple to jaw, smiled cold. Evening, ladies. He stepped inside without invitation. Name's Morgan, Jack Morgan. I work for Mr. Blackwell. Grace moved between him and me. This is a private residence. Won't take but a minute. Morgan's eyes found mine. Just wanted to have a word with the witnesses. Make sure they understand what they're getting into tomorrow. Get out. Grace's voice was steel. One of the men knocked a ceramic vase from the table. It shattered. Another kicked over a chair. Accidents happen, Morgan said. Be a shame if this whole place burned down, with people inside. My hands clenched. You don't scare me, Morgan laughed. I don't need to scare you, darling. I just need to scare them. He gestured at the window where Tom Wade was crossing the street. That boy gonna testify tomorrow? Be a real shame if he got hurt. Rattlesnake in his bedroll. Horse throws him off a cliff. So many ways a cowboy can die. The door opened behind him. Sam Cooper stood there, rifle in hand. Behind him, 6 more ranch hands, all armed. Mr. Morgan, Sam's voice was quiet. I believe the ladies asked you to leave. Morgan turned, assessed the situation. His smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Just having a conversation. Conversation's over. Sam raised the rifle slightly. You got 3 seconds to walk out that door. After that, we got a problem. The standoff stretched. Morgan's men looked at each other, at the rifles, at Sam's weathered face that held no uncertainty, no hesitation. Morgan raised his hands, still smiling. No need for unpleasantness. We were just leaving. He walked toward the door, stopped beside Sam. Blackwell's got reach, old man, farther than you think. Sam's expression didn't change. Any fight involving my people is my fight. You remember that when you're thinking about coming back. Morgan and his men left. The ranch hands stayed surrounding the house, rifles ready. Grace turned to me, her face pale but determined. You all right? I nodded, though my hands were shaking. They tried to scare us. They failed. Sam checked the load in his rifle. Nobody touches our people. Not tonight. Not ever. The ranch hands took turns standing watch until dawn. When the sun rose, we walked to the courthouse together. All of us. Tom Wade, Anna, the witnesses, the cowboys with rifles on their shoulders. Blackwell saw us coming. His face went white. We were ready. When they came back, their faces were unreadable. The judge called for the verdict. The foreman stood. On the question of the marriage, we find that Catherine Thornton was never legally married to James Thornton, as her first marriage was never dissolved. She has no claim to his property. Catherine gasped. Blackwell's face went hard. On the question of Mr. Mercer's relationship with Miss Kayla, we find no evidence of impropriety. They are free to marry if they choose. The courtroom erupted. This time the judge led it. I sat very still, not quite believing it was over. Silas pulled me to my feet, into his arms. We won, he said into my hair. We won. But I was looking past him at Catherine, at the hatred in her eyes, at Blackwell whispering urgently in her ear. This wasn't over, not yet. The attack came that night. Silas and I were riding back to the ranch in his wagon, the stars bright overhead, the air finally cooling after the day's heat. We were talking about the trial, about the future, about what came next. "I want to marry you," he said. "Soon. Tomorrow, if you'll have me." I was about to answer when I heard it. Hoofbeats, coming fast. 3 riders burst from the darkness, masks over their faces. One of them fired a shot over our heads. The horses bolted. The wagon lurched. I grabbed the seat to keep from being thrown. Silas fought the reins, trying to bring the team under control. Another shot. Closer this time. The riders pulled alongside. One of them reached for me. Silas lashed out with the reins, caught the man across the face. He fell back with a curse, but there were 3 of them. One grabbed the lead horse's bridle, forcing them to stop. "Get the woman." Hands grabbed me. I fought, kicking, clawing, felt my nails rake across flesh, heard a yelp of pain. Silas was off the wagon, pulling one of them down. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust. The man holding me dragged me off the wagon. I bit down hard on his hand, tasted blood. He screamed and let go. I ran. But he was faster, caught me by the hair, yanked me back. I heard Silas roar. Saw him break free, running toward me. Then there was another rider. This one from the ranch, Sam Cooper, on his big roan rifle in hand. "Let her go." His voice was cold. Final. The masked men froze. Sam cocked the rifle. I said, "Let her go." The man holding me released my hair. I stumbled forward. Silas caught me. More riders appeared. Tom Wade. 3 other ranch hands, all armed. The masked men looked at each other. Then they turned and rode hard into the darkness. Sam lowered his rifle. "You all right, boss?" Silas was shaking. His hands were gentle on my face, checking for injuries. "I'm fine." My voice came out stronger than I felt. "I'm fine." But we both knew. Catherine had sent them. Catherine and Blackwell. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about revenge. The next morning, Sheriff Carter came to the ranch. He looked grim. "Got your report about the attack. Problem is you can't identify the men. They were masked. We know who sent them. Knowing and proving are different things." He sighed. "I've had a talk with Mrs. Mercer. She denies any involvement. Says she was at the hotel all night." "Of course she does. There's nothing I can do without evidence." Carter looked genuinely sorry. "But I can tell you this, she's leaving. Taking the stage to Abilene this afternoon. Said Arizona doesn't agree with her." After he left, Silas turned to me. "It's over, is it?" I looked out at the ranch, at the land stretching endlessly. She tried to have me killed, but she failed. And now she's leaving. He took my hands. "Kayla, we won. We beat her in court. We survived her attack. We're still here." I wanted to believe him, wanted to let it go, but something in me couldn't. Not yet. I need to see her before she leaves. Silas started to argue, saw my face and stopped. "I'll go with you." "No. This is something I need to do alone." I found Catherine at the hotel supervising the loading of her trunks onto the stage. She saw me coming and smiled, that cold, calculating smile. Come to gloat, I stopped a few feet away. "No, I came to understand. Understand why you hate me so much. Is it because I'm Apache, because I'm poor, because Silas chose me?" Catherine's smile faded. "You want to know why?" She stepped closer. "Because you're everything I pretended to be. Kind, genuine, self-sacrificing. And he saw through me in 6 weeks, but he'd die for you after 6 days. Her voice was bitter. "You make me look like what I am. A liar, a cheat, a woman who's only worth what she can take from men." I looked at her, really looked. Saw past the beauty, the fine clothes, the practiced grace, saw the emptiness underneath. "You could have been different." "No, I couldn't. This is who I am. This is all I know how to be." "Then I'm sorry for you." Catherine laughed, harsh and broken. "Save your pity. I don't need it. Everyone needs something." I turned to leave. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." "I won't. But at least I'll be rich while I'm looking." I walked away. Didn't look back. Behind me, I heard the stage pull away. 3 months later, on a bright October morning, when the air was cool and the sky impossibly blue, Silas and I were married. The ceremony was held at the ranch, Reverend Hart presiding. Grace and Sam stood as witnesses. The hands gathered around, all of them cleaned up and wearing their best. Tom Wade had picked wildflowers from the meadow. Anna had made a cake. The whole ranch came together to celebrate. I wore a dress of white cotton that Grace had helped me sew. Simple, clean, honest, a crown of yarrow and sage in my hair. Silas wore a new suit, but his hands were the same, calloused from work, gentle when they took mine. Hart read from his book. "Do you, James Thornton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you? Kayla, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" I looked at Silas, at the man who'd tested me and lied to me and then stood beside me through everything that followed. "I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Silas kissed me gentle and sweet, and the hands cheered. The celebration lasted into the evening. There was food and music and dancing. People I'd helped over the past months came to offer congratulations. The community that had rejected me was slowly, carefully learning to accept me. As the sun set, Silas and I slipped away to the porch, our spot. We sat in silence, watching the light fade his arm around my shoulders. Happy I thought about it, about the long journey from Fort Apache, about the canyon and the cabin and the cornbread, about the trial and the attack and everything we'd survived. Yes, I'm happy. He kissed my temple. "I was thinking," he said, "about the clinic." "What clinic?" "The one you're going to open, here on the ranch, for anyone who needs help. Apache, white, Mexican, doesn't matter." I pulled back to look at him. "Silas, you're a healer, Kayla. It's who you are. And this territory needs healers," he smiled. "Besides, I already talked to Tom about clearing space in the old barn. And Grace knows about 6 women who want to learn from you." I couldn't speak, could only nod. We sat there as the stars came out, one by one, the same stars that had watched over us in the cabin, the same stars that had guided me west. My grandmother once told me I said softly that the spirits bring us the people we need. She was right. I came to Arizona looking for shelter, a roof and 4 walls, a place to belong. I found so much more. I found a home, a purpose, a love worth fighting for. I found myself. And that, I thought, watching the stars multiply overhead, was worth more than all the land and cattle and gold in the world. Silas's hand found mine. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about tomorrow, about the clinic, about all the people we'll help, about our life together." I smiled. "I'm thinking about moving forward, together. And we sat there, hands clasped, as the night settled in around us, the beginning of something new, something built not on tests or lies or fear, but on truth, on trust, on the slow, patient work of 2 broken people learning to be whole. The ranch stretched out before us in the darkness, our ranch now, our home, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called, patient and knowing, waiting for the right moment, just like my grandmother had taught me.